Beneath the marble floors of the Vatican lies a Quietest story, one rarely written in official history.
For centuries, a powerful Roman
Dynasty, known as the Orsini, moved through the corridors of the church. They crowned popes, financed crusades, and shaped the hidden architecture of power behind the Vatican. Yet today, their name appears only in fragments. In this calm historical journey for sleep, we follow the shadow of the Orsini family through secret archives, forgotten treaties, and the silent halls beneath St. Peter's Basilica to uncover how a dynasty could help rule the church while slowly disappearing from its records. Inside the Vatican's secret archives, there are volumes with localized burn marks. Pages have been torn out. Seals are shattered. Most people think the Medici built the church, but they were just the bank. The real architects have been erased from history. Their name is Orsini. And if you look closely at the floor of St. Peter's Basilica, you'll realize you're not standing in a church. You're standing inside their fortress. The name Orsini is repeatedly found beneath the celebrated frescoes of Raphael and illuminated by the grandeur of Michelangelo's dome. Sculpted into crypts, etched into seals, and emblazoned upon the banners of papal legions. Despite this pervasive presence, a review of modern archives reveals a curious omission. The family Orsini appears to vanish, as if their immense power defied historical preservation. This raises a compelling question. How could a dynasty responsible for crowning pontiffs, commanding formidable armies, and brokering significant empires simply cease to be recorded? It is plausible that their disappearance was not absolute. Rather, it suggests that history itself may have been meticulously re-scripted within the hallowed marble corridors of the Vatican, where every utterance seems to acquire a lasting resonance. The Orsini crest, depicting a bear holding a rose encircled by a chain of 12 links, once signified the very threshold of power, symbolizing a family profoundly connected to the papal throne. To devout pilgrims, this emblem might have seemed mere ornamentation. However, to those privy to its true meaning, it represented a definitive seal of dominion. The Orsini were not merely servants of the church. They were, in essence, its foundational architects. Long before the Medici extended financial credit to popes, and prior to the Farnese constructing their grand marble palaces, the Orsini had already established the intricate ecclesiastical hierarchy that would govern Western Christendom for a millennium. Yet official church histories offer only cursory mentions of this family, as if the very builders were systematically excluded from the narrative of their own grand cathedral. Within the extensive Vatican archives, a labyrinth of concealed corridors where centuries of history reside. Some volumes exhibit faint burn marks with pages evidently replaced and seals deliberately broken. Sparse remaining fragments allude to pontifices occulti, or hidden popes, a term generally dismissed by scholars as mere poetic embellishment. Nevertheless, persistent whispers suggest that this referred not to a metaphor, but to an actual office. For every publicly recognized pontiff, robed in white, there was another, unseen, enveloped in silence. And it was this invisible seat that the Orsini consistently occupied, generation after generation. In 1100 AD, the Pope wasn't a spiritual leader. He was a target. To survive, the church made a deal with the devil. The Orsini didn't just protect the Pope. They owned him. They funded the crusades not for God, but for a kingdom's ransom that would eventually trigger the downfall of the Knights Templar. By the 13th century, 3 pontiffs bore the Orsini name. Yet, their true power extended far beyond these visible crowns, residing in the subtle orchestration of papal succession itself. The Orsini recognized that command over memory equated to dominion over truth. The Church, in its meticulous pursuit of continuity, inherently understood that historical remembrance could be curated with the same precision applied to sacred scripture. As centuries progressed, various Orsini decrees were systematically reissued under alternate seals, their original authorship intentionally obscured. Their prominent family palaces were transformed into monasteries, and their elaborate tombs were relocated beneath unmarked slabs. Even their portraits underwent retouching, with faces softened and features rendered anonymous. This process was not one of outright destruction, but rather a profound transformation, an effacement executed with a peculiar reverence. The family that had once profoundly defined the Church was subtly reintegrated into its institutional fabric, rendered invisible to maintain the illusion of its purely divine origin. Nevertheless, subtle traces persist. A ledger within the Vatican treasury, dated 1312, documents a significant payment to the House of Orsini for services rendered in defense of the Holy See. This entry provides no specific details, only a sum equivalent to a kingdom's ransom. Notably, in that same year, the Knights Templar were condemned and executed for heresy. This could be dismissed as mere coincidence, or it might suggest an unrecorded transaction of immense consequence. Subsequently, in 1570, a papal bull was drafted condemning the clandestine financiers of faith. Intriguingly, this document was sealed and never officially released. The author's initials, ORS, remain faintly discernible, yet legible. Beyond the Vatican's confines, the Orsini castles formed a conspicuous constellation across the Italian landscape, including Bracciano, Grodara, and Monterotondo. Each fortress was erected upon ancient foundations and interconnected by a precise, almost deliberate pattern that defies mere chance. Beneath their chapels, catacombs extend into depths far exceeding those shown on official maps. In one such catacomb, uncovered by restorers in the 1980s, a fresco portrays a scene entirely unsanctioned by ecclesiastical doctrine. 12 figures kneeling before a luminous mirror, their faces indistinct, their hands raised in a gesture of unity. Faded Latin words encircling the frame still read, ad lucem reversus, returned to the light. The nature of the light they served remains enigmatic. The Church officially categorizes this image as a later addition, dismissed as heretical art. However, pigment analysis conclusively dates it to the 15th century, precisely the period when the Orsini's influence achieved its apex. Certain art historians hypothesize that the mirror symbolizes divine wisdom. Others, more reticent to speak publicly, observe that its proportions remarkably correspond to the great bronze door of St. Peter's Basilica, suggesting the artist subtly implied that the church itself was merely a reflection of a more ancient truth, one which the Orsini ostensibly maintained. In subterranean corridors beneath St. John Lateran, archivists once discovered a reliquary containing a single parchment. Although too deteriorated to decipher, it was sealed with red wax bearing the impression of a bear and a rose. Upon exposure to air, the parchment disintegrated into dust. No record of its content survives, save for a notation in a private inventory. Documentum ex Domino Orsini. Restrictum. Document from Lord Orsini. Restricted. This suggests the document retained its authority even in its absence. Perhaps the ultimate form of power resides not in what is legible, but in what is rendered indecipherable. Within the official chronicles of the Vatican, families such as the Medici are celebrated for their immense wealth, and the Borgia for their scandalous intrigues. The Orsini, by contrast, recede into mere footnotes. Yet their descendants consistently surfaced in clandestine roles, serving as papal advisors, archivists, and confessors. One individual is reputed to have supervised the comprehensive reorganization of the Vatican Library in 1922, an undertaking during which hundreds of manuscripts deemed unsuitable for public scrutiny were sequestered. Another served as an intermediary during the Second World War, facilitating the secure passage of valuable artworks under the authority of the Holy See. Their pervasive influence endures, subtle as a faint watermark, perceptible only when viewed under precise illumination. This invites contemplation. What if history is not merely authored by its victors or victims, but rather by those who meticulously curate that which remains unseen? The Orsini grasped this fundamental principle long before the advent of modern institutions. For them, to disappear was not to perish, but to persist. By systematically removing themselves from the visible historical record, they achieved a form of immortality that eluded both kings and popes. Endurance through deliberate absence. Every empire, by its very nature, crumbles because of its insistence on overt visibility. Only those entities capable of discreet self-effacement manage to survive within the intricate tapestry of memory. As the resonant echoes of church bells permeate the Roman twilight, one might traverse their ancient palaces, unaware of the profound shadow that still lingers across these venerable stones. Their distinctive sigil, the bear and rose, occasionally reappears in unforeseen locations, carved into public fountains, embossed on verlook book, or subtly integrated into the intricate tracery of cathedral windows. This emblem functions not as a display of pride, but as a potent reminder. The true architects of faith, it suggests, never pursued overt glory. Their aspiration was permanence. Perhaps this explains why the Vatican, in its pursuit of perceived perfection, guards their secrets so assiduously. Indeed, every grand monument necessitates a solid foundation, and some foundations must inherently remain concealed, lest the magnificent illusion constructed above them begin to fragment. Beneath the church's awe-inspiring grandeur, beneath centuries of prayers and accumulated wealth, lies the faint, yet discernible outline of the family that fundamentally shaped it. Their name, once uttered with profound reverence, now persists only as whispers in labyrinthine corridors that seemingly lead nowhere, and in inscriptions that diminish with the slightest touch. History may deem them forgotten, yet the very stones themselves retain their memory. The Vatican, as it stands today, with its majestic marble colonnades, its expansive dome, and its intricate hierarchy, did not arise solely from divine inspiration. Instead, it was meticulously engineered, layer by layer, by astute minds that comprehended power as both tangible structure and sacred ritual. Long before the Medici attained mastery in finance, or the Farnese adeptly navigated the complexities of politics, the Orsini were already crafting the unseen blueprints of papal governance. Their profound influence was not articulated in explicit doctrine, but rather subtly encoded within the very architecture, legal frameworks, and ceremonial practices of the Church. These systems were so flawlessly conceived that centuries later, they continue to be erroneously perceived as the direct will of heaven itself. By the 11th century, Rome presented a damaged visage. Once the vibrant heart of an empire, it had devolved into a complex maze of ruins, monasteries, and warring baronial factions. The papacy, beleaguered by imperial pressures, desperately sought stability, which the Orsini readily provided. Their role extended beyond merely defending the church. They actively rebuilt it. Their skilled masons erected fortifications that withstood countless conflicts. Their scribes meticulously redrafted decrees, compelling emperors to swear oaths of obedience to the broader world. These appeared as profound acts of devotion. To the Orsini, however, they constituted deliberate acts of meticulous design. Under their discreet guidance, the church evolved not merely into a temple, but into a sophisticated mechanism capable of governing faith, wealth, and collective memory across entire continents. Indeed, every comprehensive blueprint commences with its foundation. For the Orsini, their bedrock foundation was an unbroken lineage. They profoundly understood that enduring power necessitated both sacred legitimacy and a tangible, generational inheritance. Through meticulously arranged strategic marriages, they intricately interwoven their bloodline with those of influential cardinals, formidable knights, and reigning monarchs. It was not uncommon for future popes to attend the baptisms of Orsini children. Their expansive family estates transformed into veritable spiritual fortresses, locales where theological principles intersected with strategic planning, and where the divine word was assessed in terms of both material wealth and political allegiance. Their particular genius resided not in overt conquest, but in ensuring seamless continuity. They never aspired to depose the papacy. Rather, they sought to subtly permeate and inhabit it. Their motto, once prominently inscribed above the entrance of Palazzo Orsini, declared, "Per fidem, per imperium," through faith, through empire. This was not a supplication, but a guiding principle. Faith must serve the empire, and the empire in turn must consecrate faith. By the 13th century, their pervasive influence extended geographically from Avignon to Jerusalem, achieving this not through military force, but through an intricate structural design. The subtle engineering of widespread obedience. During those centuries, ecclesiastical councils frequently functioned more as assemblies of political ambition than as convocations of spiritual holiness. Rival factions of cardinals engaged in intense debates regarding the nature of salvation, even as armies amassed beyond city walls. Yet, amidst this tumult, a consistent pattern emerged. Decisions that advanced Orsini interests were often quietly approved, as if by an unassailable divine consensus. The family shrewdly recognized early on that the most efficacious form of governance is that which appears inherently inevitable. By intricately integrating their will into established policies and protocols, they rendered their presence virtually indistinguishable from the institution itself. Even the revered architecture of Rome bears their subtle signature. The foundational design of the Vatican Basilica, long preceding Michelangelo's artistic zenith, adhered to an ancient schema conceived under Orsini direction. Historical blueprints depict a precise geometrical harmony, linking the altar, dome, and crypt, aligning them with celestial constellations that correspond to the feast days of their ancestral saints. Contemporary scholars often dismiss this as mere coincidence. However, these proportions are consistently replicated in Orsini chapels throughout Lazio and Umbria, each incorporating the identical clandestine ratio of 12:1. This ratio may symbolize the unity between the 12 apostles and the singular divine authority, or perhaps between the 12 noble houses of Rome and the one preeminent family that subtly guided them all. From this established foundation, the Orsini meticulously refined the hierarchical structure that would ultimately characterize the church. Prior to their influence, bishops primarily functioned as local lords, their adherence to creed somewhat decentralized. Subsequently, they were transformed into offices within a cohesive global order, each owing fealty not directly to God but to the central authority of Rome. The papacy itself evolved from a revered seat of prayer into a centralized governmental apparatus, a sophisticated network of allegiance maintained through official correspondence, taxation, and strategic installation of apprehension. This constituted a subtle yet profound revolution. The Orsini guaranteed its enduring permanence by meticulously shaping the office of the cardinal, a position necessita they themselves frequently occupied, and through which they could discreetly exert influence over popes, much as they had once subtly guided monarchs. Their methodologies were fundamentally architectural in nature. Each reform represented a carefully placed stone, every council a supporting column. They intricately layered their intentions to such a degree that it became impossible to differentiate between genuine faith and calculated policy. Whenever the papal curia deliberated on the intricate balance between divine authority and temporal power, Orsini perspectives consistently prevailed. A chronicler from 1252 acutely observed that Rome now speaks in two tongues, one of prayer, one of law, yet both answer to a single breath. His manuscript was subsequently censored and the author's name has been lost to history. Nevertheless, his evocative description endures, faintly etched on the margins of a Vatican codex, marked only by the initials ORS. On occasion, their formidable power elicited considerable envy. The Colonna family, significant rivals in both noble lineage and political influence, openly accused the Orsini of transforming the papal court into their personal domain. Conflicts frequently erupted, often artfully disguised as theological disagreements. Yet even when the Orsini experienced military setbacks on the battlefield, their profound influence persisted within the inner sanctums of the papal chambers. For while swords possessed the capacity to seize cities, only an enduring lineage could truly shape eternity, and eternity constituted their chosen arena. It is recounted that during the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215, an Orsini prelate advanced a doctrine asserting that earthly authority perfectly mirrors the divine. This phrase subsequently became an integral component of canon law. Subtly embedded within these words was the profound assertion that the hierarchical structure of heaven intrinsically justified and reinforced earthly hierarchies. The Orsini thus bequeathed to the Church its most enduring paradox. To obey God was, by extension, to obey His institution. And to question the institution was, implicitly, to question God himself. The architectural framework of faith thereby became inseparable from the underlying architecture of absolute control. Throughout the Renaissance, while artists meticulously rendered paradisiacal scenes on cathedral ceilings, and philosophers engaged in profound debates on the nature of reason, the Orsini meticulously preserved their characteristic silence. Their portraits typically feature serene countenances, and their inscriptions invariably speak solely of dedicated service. Yet, behind those seemingly gentle expressions, resided the masterful engineers of a system destined to outlast numerous kingdoms. Even with the emergence of powerful new dynasties such as the Medici, the Farnese, and the Barberini, the foundational blueprint remained undeniably Orsini. The structures they erected endured, and the hierarchy they meticulously forged persisted. The Church consequently evolved into an empire impervious to conquest, for its dominion was established not through military might, but through the profound governance of human conscience. However, all designs, irrespective of their brilliance, inherently contain vulnerabilities. The Orsini keenly understood that power, when rendered excessively visible, would inevitably invite its own destruction. Consequently, they instructed the Church in the art of concealing itself within symbolic representations of entrenching authority beneath a veneer of humility. In solemn papal ceremonies, they instituted the ritual of the veil, a significant moment when the elected pontiff's face is momentarily obscured prior to his coronation. For the devout, this symbolized spiritual rebirth. For the underlying architects, it conveyed an entirely different meaning. A profound reminder that divine authority must perpetually remain unseen. This act of deliberate concealment gradually evolved into established doctrine, a gesture meticulously repeated for centuries. Even as its origins receded from collective memory, the Orsini's most profound creation was neither the Vatican's physical architecture or its political machinations, but rather its fundamental concept. The radical idea that faith could be meticulously administered, akin to an empire, and that obedience could be rendered eternal if consecrated by an aura of mystery. This constituted the veritable architecture of papal power, a structural framework of belief so exquisitely intricate that its very creators could seamlessly disappear within it. Standing today in St. Peter's Square, one might admire the impeccable geometry of Bernini's colonnade and experience profound awe at its symmetry. Few, however, recognize that it subtly mirrors the precise layout of an Orsini fortress, long since demolished, its very stones repurposed to construct the church it once safeguarded. The original plan endures, discreetly folded within the Vatican library, annotated in faded Latin. Domus Dei per manus hominis, the house of God through the hand of man. Although unsigned, its distinctive handwriting corresponds precisely with that of an Orsini archivist, known only by the initials P.O. Perhaps architecture consistently served as their most authentic language, not merely artistic expression, but command indelibly inscribed in stone. Each column represented a line of scripture, every arch a sentence of law. Through this medium, they imparted the principle that control could persist for centuries if concealed beneath a veneer of devotion. While the faithful may never consciously decipher these embedded messages, the very walls themselves resonate with them. As centuries elapse, the intricate structure they designed continues to stand, immense, unyielding, and subtly animated. Popes may succeed one another and empires may collapse, but the foundational blueprint endures. It is rumored that deep within the Vatican archives, an older, more profound plan exists. A map of the basilica depicting not its final construction, but its ultimate intended design. 12 concentric circles intersected by a singular axis of light, descending into the crypt below. Such a design, so exquisitely perfect, seems almost beyond human creation, yet it bears the unmistakable imprint of the Orsini hand. Should such a plan truly exist, it has never been publicly disclosed. However, its explicit revelation may be unnecessary. The corroborating evidence is ubiquitous. In every corridor, it invariably leads back to a central point, and in every ritual meticulously repeated without question. The Church, in its pursuit of perfection, continues to adhere to the architectural principles they initially conceived. Thus, for as long as that underlying structure persists, so too does their will, subtly embedded within the stone, steering both celestial and temporal dominion from the very shadows they meticulously constructed. While power, cemented in stone, may endure for centuries, blood inherently carries a more profound essence. the subtle, generational transmission of will. The Orsini comprehended this principle more profoundly than any other family of their era. Where empires asserted control through military might, they governed through an intricate lineage. Their dominion was not forcibly acquired, but meticulously inherited. Navigating through strategic marriages, solemn oaths, and confidential secrets meticulously passed between generations. To the wider public, they appeared as esteemed noble patrons of the Church. To those possessing deeper insight, however, they constituted the very lifeblood of papal authority itself, invisible, sacred, and inextricably binding. In the historical chronicles of medieval Rome, the Orsini are frequently cited as formidable warriors, astute diplomats, and influential cardinals. Yet they are seldom described by their true function, the masterful engineers of continuity. Each successive generation, guided by what their private documents termed the Covenant of Light and Stone, meticulously expanded their influence through alliances that deliberately blurred the distinctions between the sacred and the secular. Their daughters were strategically married into the royal courts of France and Naples. Their sons entered the Vatican not as mere functionaries, but as inheritors of unseen thrones. Even when the Church ostensibly prohibited dynastic influence, Orsini blood subtly permeated its veins. Cleverly disguised by ecclesiastical robes and solemn vows. In those centuries, marriage was not a matter of personal affection. It was a sophisticated form of architectural design. Through these strategic unions, the Orsini constructed intricate bridges across Europe, meticulously forging a network that ultimately outlasted numerous kingdoms. A solitary wedding could profoundly reconfigure political landscapes for decades. When Claricia Orsini married Jacopo Caetani, nephew of Pope Boniface VIII, two historically rival houses effectively merged into a single, formidable presence. Their union sealed a pact known only to a select few, the merging of archives, substantial assets, and ancestral titles. Within a single generation, virtually every cardinal of significant stature was related to some degree to an Orsini. Consequently, to challenge the Orsini was, in essence, to challenge the very foundational structure of the Church itself. However, their ultimate mastery resided in that which defied traceability. Beneath the publicly acknowledged marriages were clandestine vows, solemn oaths of loyalty sworn not before God, but before the distinctive seal of the bear and the rose. It is recounted that during these secret ceremonies conducted within the candlelight chapels of their ancestral estates, each initiate would place a single drop of blood upon a silver mirror, reciting ancient words now lost to recorded history. The mirror would then be veiled and ritually interred beneath the altar, symbolizing that power, once formally pledged, must thenceforth remain unseen. While scholars often dismiss this ritual as mere legend, fragments of such mirrors have indeed been discovered beneath Orsini ruins, their surfaces blackened by time, yet remarkably unbroken. For the Orsini, blood was both a potent metaphor and a tangible mechanism. They firmly believed that divine order necessitated human custodians, a select lineage tasked with balancing the immense weight of heaven and earth. To them, control was not an act of ambition, but a sacred duty consecrated through hereditary succession. One Orsini patriarch, in a surviving letter, articulately declared that faith is the geometry of obedience. Without structure, it collapses. Without blood, it decays. This profound statement, centuries later, was anonymously transcribed into a theological treatise, thereby forming the conceptual bedrock for what historians now term the the doctrine of vice sacred governance, the conviction that divine authority can only manifest through a lineage specifically ordained by providence. However, providence as interpreted by the Orsini was inherently selective. They perceived themselves as the vigilant custodians of an ancient order, one that predated Christianity itself. Their lineage, they asserted, traced not to Saint Peter, but to Rome's long-forgotten priest-kings. Their private archives reportedly house genealogical charts meticulously linking their ancestry to Etruscan high priests and the augurs who divined omens from the flight of birds long before the construction of temples. Some members even claimed direct descent from Servius Tullius, the sixth king of Rome, whose reforms established the inaugural census of sacred power. Regardless of its historical veracity, this compelling myth bestowed profound purpose upon their clandestine control. By embracing both pagan and papal legacies, they strategically positioned themselves as essential bridges between distinct historical epochs. The guardians of the world preceding the cross, and the architects reshaping the world that followed it. Even their distinctive symbols reflected this inherent duality. The bear, an emblem of strength and enduring resilience, represented the earthly domain. Its counterpart, the rose, symbolized divine beauty and profound secrecy. Together, these elements formed a potent sigil of balance, nature and spirit, body and soul, authority and grace. This combined emblem frequently appeared on their rings, frescoes, and manuscripts, often subtly integrated within intricate floral patterns or meticulously carved into marble thresholds. A Vatican inventory from 1489 includes a note describing a golden chalice, intricately engraved with a rose held by an upright beast, which was confiscated from an Orsini cardinal accused of heresy. While the charge was ultimately dismissed, the chalice itself mysteriously vanished from all records, as if it had been reclaimed by the pervasive silence that meticulously safeguards their legacy. Through their inherited traditions, they also meticulously preserved arcane knowledge. Their expansive estates functioned as living archives, where prescribed texts were painstakingly copied under feigned authorship. When the initial index of prohibited books was formally compiled, several critical volumes mysteriously disappeared prior to their official publication. Decades later, remarkably similar manuscripts resurfaced within Orsini libraries, now translated and bearing altered titles. These included fragments of lost Hermetic writings and profound commentaries on the Sibylline oracles. Their scholars regarded these not as heresies, but as vital remnants of a primeval divine language, one that predated all established scripture, intricately linking human will with cosmic law. The Church, while officially condemning such concepts, discreetly adopted their symbolism for its own sacred rituals. Even the papal tiara, with its distinctive triple crown, subtly mirrors an Orsini insignia that portrays the ascent of power through three distinct realms: body, mind, and spirit. By the 15th century, as the Renaissance cast its intellectual light across Europe, the Orsini strategically withdrew further into profound secrecy. Their pervasive influence persisted, yet their overt presence diminished. To the external world, they presented themselves as esteemed patrons of the arts, zealous protectors of monasteries, and generous benefactors of the impoverished. However, behind this meticulously crafted facade, they refined their bloodline with unparalleled precision, arranging unions not primarily for financial gain, but specifically for the inheritance of profound knowledge. It is widely rumored that only individuals bearing the purest lineage were ever granted access to the family's inner library. a clandestine chamber believed to lie beneath Palazzo Orsini at Monte Giordano, where shelves of lead-bound books reportedly catalogued prophecies, confidential papal correspondence, and genealogies that were officially forbidden to exist. The Church significantly benefited from their deliberate silence when inquisitors rigorously sought to cleanse Rome of corruption. The Orsini appeared remarkably untainted. Their confessionals remained empty, their perceived sins rendered invisible. This was likely due to their long-mastered art of substitution, meticulously replacing their own names with others in official records, their personal signatures with arcane sigils, and their very bloodline with symbolic representations. Consequently, they could operate unseen, exerting command without ever overtly appearing to rule. Their dominion was an empire founded upon absence, and this very absence proved to be its most impenetrable defense. Nevertheless, blood retains its memory. Even when names are systematically obliterated, discernible patterns persist. In the centuries that followed, virtually every significant shift within the Vatican, ranging from profound reforms to expansive growth, remarkably coincided with an Orsini birth, marriage, or burial. Such repeated coincidences invariably evolve into deliberate design. The family's concealed influence continued to guide papal policy long after their prominent crests receded from public visibility. A letter dated 1773, preserved within the private collection of a defrocked bishop, references a lineage that binds the Holy See by inheritance of obedience. While the signature is conspicuously absent, the faint seal, a rose delicately encircled by 12 dots, unmistakably betrays its Orsini origin. Today, many historians assert that the influence of the Orsini family concluded with the broader decline of the aristocracy. However, within certain restricted circles of Rome, their name is still uttered in hushed tones. A persistent rumor suggests that descendants of the Orsini continue to live discreetly under altered names, occupying pivotal roles in diplomatic posts, influential foundations, and various ecclesiastical orders. Some speculation posits that they oversee the very archives still sealed by their Orsini ancestors. Others whisper that they manage the Vatican's critical financial branches, remaining invisible yet indispensable. Whether these assertions represent verifiable truth or mere legend is ultimately secondary, for every enduring structure of power necessitates a sustaining lineage, and every lineage, once consecrated, inherently resists to extinction. What is blood, ultimately, if not the most ancient form of scripture, indelibly inscribed in flesh, legible only through the passage of time? The Orsini profoundly comprehended that while written records may perish in flames and empires may inevitably crumble, lineage perseveres through silence, serving to sanctify control. Just as faith transforms obedience into eternity, so too does their bloodline continue to flow, unseen and unspoken, beneath the basilicas and vaults of Rome, inextricably entwined with the very church it meticulously constructed to conceal itself. War has consistently served as the most candid mirror of faith, as it invariably exposes realities that devotion often obscures. In the context of Rome, no conflict was ever solely waged for territorial acquisition. Every crusade, every rebellion, every discreetly whispered excommunication bore the faint yet unmistakable imprint of Orsini design. They did not command armies from the saddle or from the pulpit. Instead, their influence emanated from a position of strategic absence, maneuvering generals and cardinals with the precision of chess pieces carved from stone and blood. Their true genius lay not in achieving victory, but in masterful orchestration. The intricate art of ensuring that, irrespective of the immediate victor, the Church, and by extension, the Orsini themselves, would remain inviolable at the very epicenter of any tumult. By the 12th century, the papacy had evolved into both a sovereign crown and a sacred cross. A burgeoning spiritual empire driven by an aspiration to reclaim the power and prestige Rome had once lost. The Crusades served as the primary instruments of this reclamation, undertaken not solely for spiritual salvation, but profoundly for the strategic control of trade routes, sacred relics, and the very tenets of belief. The Orsini discreetly financed the initial crusading campaigns under the guise of devout piety. Nevertheless, every banner, though overtly religious, subtly bore their unseen emblem, the rose intricately entwined with the bear. Chroniclers document the family's provision of food, ships, and substantial gold to the armies destined for Jerusalem. Yet they conspicuously omit the commensurate returns the Orsini received. Valuable indulgences, extensive land grants, and, most crucially, profound silence. Individuals who dared to question their pervasive influence often found themselves exiled or summarily accused of heresy, their historical records expunged with the same ruthless efficiency employed in the canonization of saints. The Orsini quickly assimilated the understanding that warfare could effectively serve as a form of purification, the elimination of rivals and a strategic redirection of public attention. When competing noble houses such as the Colonna or Savelli attempted to challenge papal supremacy, crusades conveniently diverted their military forces, thereby leaving Rome susceptible to discrete internal reorganizations. In the aftermath of each such departure, Orsini envoys would enter the Curia, meticulously revising decrees and appointments. This ensured that upon the soldiers' return, the very hierarchy they believed they were defending had been fundamentally altered. This constituted a form of warfare conducted not with traditional weaponry, but through the conquest of structural power itself. The initial crusade left much of Europe in the grip of widespread starvation. Conversely, the Orsini estates prospered considerably, while other factions fervently prayed for divine intervention. The Orsini adeptly managed the flow of grain from Lazio to Venice, strategically converting widespread famine into political loyalty. A surviving account from an abbot records the delivery of 12 wagons of bread, each bearing the distinctive rose seal. While this abbey survived, many others perished, illustrating how, in their end, charity was transformed into a form of weaponry, and faith was subtly disguised as logistical mastery. Their influence, however, extended far beyond mere provisioning. Several Orsini men accompanied the crusading forces, serving not as knights, but as confessors, thereby carrying direct papal authority onto the battlefield. Through their discreet channels, crucial orders were whispered that profoundly altered the course of engagements. For instance, at Antioch, when troop morale significantly waned, an Orsini priest dramatically presented what he claimed was a fragment of the true cross, purportedly discovered amidst the debris of a ruined chapel. This momentous discovery revitalized the army's flagging faith, ultimately leading to a decisive victory. Years later, the relic was definitively proven to be a fabrication, crafted from cedar and gold leaf. Yet, by then, its strategic purpose had been fully served. The Church's triumph was secured, and the Orsini name remained, as intended, unspoken. Within Rome itself, their influence was directed towards a distinct form of conflict, the subtle, unseen struggle between theological doctrine and temporal dominion. When emperors sought to challenge the concept of papal infallibility, it was invariably Orsini diplomacy that skillfully resolved these disputes. Frequently, through nonviolent means, they comprehended that authentic power resided in maintaining a delicate equilibrium rather than in outright conquest. The emperor needed to project an image of strength, while the church had to remain unassailable. Each entity was dependent upon the other, and both relied on the unseen hands meticulously orchestrating this balance. A fragment of an Orsini letter states, "Conflict sustains the throne. When peace endures too long, a faith forgets its master." Yet not all conflicts were waged beyond the city walls. The very streets of Rome served as a theater for sanctified violence. Between the 12th and 14th centuries, rival factions transformed the city into a perpetual battleground. The Orsini controlled strategic towers across the Tiber, the fortresses interconnected by a network of subterranean tunnels beneath the cobblestones. When adversaries advanced, bells would toll from their palaces, not as calls to prayer, but as military signals. Within minutes, the streets would clear. Within hours, pivotal decisions that reshaped papal alliances were made. The shedding of blood upon the pavement held minimal significance. The ultimate outcome had already been determined within the inner sanctums of power. During the pontificate of Pope Nicholas III, himself an Orsini by birth, the Vatican effectively became the family's fortified stronghold. His reforms centralized church property under direct papal ownership, thereby transferring control of Christendom's vast wealth into hands that already bore the Orsini crest. Under his meticulous guidance, fortresses were erected along critical pilgrimage routes, ostensibly for protective purposes, yet strategically positioned to levy taxes upon travelers and merchants. When critics dared to accuse the Pope of nepotism, such accusations disappeared as swiftly and completely as those who voiced them. His demise in 1280 was reported as sudden. Rumors persisted that his death resulted not from illness but from a profound, unsettling revelation, that he had uncovered the true extent of his own bloodline's pervasive control. The church interred him with full honors. However, his personal archives were immediately sealed and have remained unopened ever since. The Orsini's involvement in subsequent crusades evolved into a more nuanced role. They transitioned from direct sponsorship to strategic arbitration, often providing financial support to both opposing factions when it proved expedient. Their skilled emissaries meticulously negotiated intricate truces, while their clerics absolved both spiritual sins and financial debts with equal efficacy. These prolonged conflicts, though increasingly costly, consistently proved profitable for the Orsini. By the 14th century, the reach of Orsini influence extended geographically from the banks of the Tiber to the remote deserts of Palestine, with their agents proficient in both Latin and Arabic. They functioned less as overt conquerors and more as astute curators, meticulously managing conflicts to maintain a delicate equilibrium. Even the severe ecclesiastical penalty of excommunication became a potent weapon within their formidable arsenal. To be expelled from the church was to forfeit one's identity and indeed, one's prospect of eternity. The Orsini mastered its strategic application. They persuaded popes to employ it as a tool of diplomacy rather than solely as punishment. Entire kingdoms were strategically excommunicated, only to be subsequently redeemed, with each absolution invariably accompanied by significant tribute, and each spiritual curse ultimately compensated in gold. Historical records reveal patterns of timing too precise to be dismissed as mere coincidence. Adversaries of Orsini allies were swiftly condemned, while rivals were reinstated only after substantial concession.
Behind every
papal bull and official seal lay a guiding hand. When heresy threatened the church from within, the Orsini meticulously shaped the institutional response. They offered expert counsel on the establishment of the Inquisition, advocating for methodical precision over fervent zeal. The primary objective was not annihilation, but rather the preservation of absolute control. One of their treatises shrewdly observed that fear is most effective when it saves, not when it kills. Thus, the intricate machinery of confession and secrecy was conceived, an institution as complex as their own lineage, sustained by unwavering silence and unwavering faith. As centuries unfolded, the nature of warfare underwent transformations, but its underlying essence remained constant. The Holy League, the Italian Wars, and even the constantly shifting alliance of Renaissance courts all bore the indelible concealed calculus of Orsini's strategy. Their private archives reference a concept known as equilibrium sanctum, or sacred balance, the profound conviction that conflict was an essential prerequisite for maintaining divine order. For the Orsini, chaos was not indicative of failure, but rather of functional necessity. Every war, every ecclesiastical schism, and every excommunication served to reaffirm the Church's claim to moral authority. All while the family remained its unseen, orchestrating engineer. Perhaps this very philosophy explains why the Vatican proved resilient, even as surrounding empires collapsed. The Orsini conceived of warfare not as an act of destruction, but as a mechanism for continuity, a means of reestablishing allegiance, purging systemic instability, and reasserting obedience. To them, war was akin to liturgy and bloodshed, the very sacrament of empire. Each crusade purified historical memory. Each rebellion meticulously erased its dissenting witnesses. In the profound silence that followed battle, as the bells of Rome tolled for peace, their emissaries meticulously moved among the ruins. They initiated rebuilding efforts, meticulously recorded events, and strategically redefined narratives. History was thus rewritten, not by victorious commanders, but by diligent archivists. Grand monuments rose upon sites of massacres. Saints were elevated to replace fallen soldiers. Parchment superseded bone. The world, in its collective amnesia, forgot who had orchestrated the carnage. And the Orsini, having served both celestial and temporal empires, once again receded into profound silence. Even today, certain relics bear their subtle marks. A papal sword intricately engraved with a rose, a crusader's banner stitched with a bear's paw, artifacts catalogued without discernible origin. Each is a fragment of their meticulous orchestration, silent evidence of conflicts waged not for salvation, but for enduring permanence. Thus the pattern persists. Behind every proclaimed holy cause, a quieter, more profound objective invariably lingers: the preservation of inherent order. The Orsini comprehended that faith required conflict, just as a flame necessitates air. Consequently, they ensured that this metaphorical fire was never extinguished. Their pervasive shadow accompanied every crusade, rebellion, and excommunication, remaining unseen, yet unmistakably influential. They meticulously constructed a church that governed through sanctified chaos, an institution whose conflicts concluded precisely where they commenced, within the very walls of Rome, where the invisible architects of power continue to reside. While traditional narratives assert that the church provided sustenance to the hungry, garments to the impoverished, and refuge to the displaced, historical scrutiny suggests a divergent reality. As Europe experienced widespread famine, The Orsini vaults reportedly overflowed. Their secretly minted coinage, produced in clandestine foundries beneath their estates, conspicuously lacked the Christian cross, bearing instead only the crowned serpent, an emblem signifying dominion achieved through debt. To the devout, this appeared as an act of charity. To those indebted to them, it represented a form of captivity, artfully disguised as grace. By the 14th century, a devastating famine had gripped the continent, swiftly followed by plague, causing fear to supplant faith. The powerful kingdoms of Europe incurred immense debts to finance both incessant wars and fervent prayers. The Church, possessing an abundance of sacred relics but a dearth of silver, discreetly turned to the sole family it could not publicly acknowledge, the Orsini. They had long perfected the intricate movement of gold across abbeys, markets, and international ports, establishing a formidable network extending from the Venetian lagoons to the distant shores of England. They did not merely lend to individual monarchs. They lent to entire kingdoms. And when these kingdoms eventually succumbed, their debts remained sacrosanct. A letter preserved within the Vatican treasury and dated 1357 from an anonymous papal accountant states, "The rose seal covers all." This phrase refers to documents marked with a distinctive symbol, reserved exclusively for transactions considered too sensitive for public view. Freckled beneath this enigmatic seal lay the very lifeblood of empires, loans extended to monarchs, cardinals, and merchants alike. As the famine intensified and the faithful desperately implored for bread, the Church once again resorted to borrowing, effectively exchanging indulgences for coinage and faith for financial interest. The Orsini thus became the Church's invisible bankers, ensuring that salvation itself could be strategically financed. Unlike the public ledgers maintained by the merchants of Florence or Genoa, the Orsini never permitted their financial records to be publicly scrutinized. Their accounting was meticulously liturgical. Every debt was meticulously recorded, not in numerical figures, but in complex symbols. Each mark simultaneously represented both monetary value and a solemn vow. A spiral denoted loyalty, a serpent symbolized obedience, and a rose signified redemption. Some theorized that their entire financial system was intricately encoded as a form of theology, thereby rendering sin and credit indistinguishable. In various monasteries across Italy, surviving manuscripts still contain marginal notes inscribed in Orsini cipher, a sophisticated language of trade articulated through the lexicon of prayer. They were not the initial lenders to pontiffs, but they were the first to effectively transform faith itself into a quantifiable currency. When the Avignon papacy required substantial funds for the construction of its elaborate palaces, it was Orsini gold that provided the foundational capital. In exchange, they were granted extensive rights over tolls, monasteries, and crucial ports, a sophisticated form of divine mortgage. The faithful paid their tithes to the Church, and the Church, in turn, effectively paid a tithe to the Orsini. For this powerful family, such an arrangement was perceived not as heresy, but as a fundamental aspect of order. One of their decrees famously states, "As heaven governs the soul, so gold governs the world." The crowned serpent emblem, meticulously stamped on their coins, was far from a mere symbolic idol. In alchemical traditions, it represented Ouroboros, knowledge that perpetually consumes itself, embodying both creation and relentless control. The Orsini grasped its profounder implication. The debt once incurred possessed an intrinsic immortality.
It did not perish, rather it merely transformed its essence, endlessly devouring itself to initiate new cycles.
They strategically applied this principle to the very concept of empire.
Monarchs might fall and hopes might pass away, but debt, they realized, would endure.
And through this enduring debt,
Power itself achieved a form of immortality.
during the cataclysmic Black Death, when millions succumbed and economies worldwide imploded, the Orsini strategically withdrew their agents from plague-stricken cities. Their expansive estates became sanctuaries for nobles seeking protection, and their monasteries offered refuge to scholars fleeing contagion. Within these candle-lit havens, agreements were renegotiated, with interest either forgiven or compounded, depending entirely on the allegiance of the debtor. When the devastating plague eventually receded, those who survived found their lives and fortunes inextricably linked to the patronage of the Bear and Rose. Rome itself underwent its recovery, supported by loans that remain invisible to conventional historical accounts.
Even the grand rebuilding of St. John Lateran, conventionally attributed to papal generosity, was in reality financed through a fund whose paper trail ultimately terminates in an Orsini signature, now largely absurd by the passage of time.
Some historical analyses contend that the European Renaissance originated not from artistic innovation, but from sophisticated accounting practices. If this premise holds true,
The Orsini functioned as its essential midwives.
their substantial vaults provided funding for the architects who designed soaring cathedrals,
The printers who disseminated scripture, and the navigators who charted unexplored new worlds. They characterized these contributions as patronage.
However, every coin advanced carried an inherent expectation. Artists commissioned by the Orsini to depict angels frequently incorporated subtle, cryptic symbols into their works. A serpent subtly coiled beneath a halo, or a rose intricately hidden within the folds of a sacred robe.
These might have represented either an expression of gratitude or a veiled warning. Michelangelo himself is famously reported to have declined a commission under their seal, reputedly stating, "The serpent already wears the crown. My chisel will not serve it."
This telling anecdote
Was subsequently removed from Vatican records. By the 15th century, the Orsini's expansive financial network operated in parallel to the Church's official treasury. When pontiffs required funds, they no longer solicited tithes from the faithful. Instead, they directly petitioned the Orsini family. Their terms were invariably discreet, and their contracts were meticulously sealed with red wax.
One such contract, recently discovered in a private collection, details an agreement between an unnamed pontiff and the House of Orsini, ensuring payment for military campaigns in exchange for exclusive rights over the crucial salt trade. This transaction was designated as confessio occulta, a hidden confession, and filed among penitential records rather than conventional financial accounts. Concealing commercial transactions within the sanctity of confession represented the Orsini's most sophisticated form of deception. They did not merely finance wars. They meticulously engineered dependence, debt, in their system. Became an integral doctrine. The more the church borrowed, the more sanctified the lender appeared.
Through loans, ingeniously disguised as acts of piety, they transmuted financial obligation into a form of worship.
To owe, wrote one of their cardinals, is to remember grace.
This profound statement, quoted centuries later by Jesuit economists, perfectly encapsulated the theology of
Credit that continues to underpin the modern world, where debt is perceived as eternal and absolution invariably necessitates payment. When the Reformation erupted, its fervent momentum was, in part, fueled by the very gold the Orsini had previously dispersed. Paradoxically,
Protestant princes secured loans from Orsini vaults even as they openly denounced Rome, thereby demonstrating that even rebellion could serve its unseen architect. The Orsini family maintained a position of calculated neutrality, their vast fortune expanding as the tapestry of faith fractured. Amidst this profound chaos, they discreetly acquired lands confiscated from monasteries, effectively converting sacred ecclesiastical property into substantial secular power. To the victorious, they appeared indispensable. To the defeated, their presence seemed an immutable inevitability. It recounted that a particular Orsini banker wore a ring intricately engraved with the image of a serpent biting its own tail, an Ouroboros. Inscribed within the band was the Latin phrase, Nil perit, nothing is lost, and indeed, nothing truly was. When kingdoms defaulted on their debts, they compensated in political influence. When popes sought absolution, they paid in valuable relics. The Orsini did not accumulate gold out of mere avarice, but for strategic leverage. Every coin in their possession became a key, every debt a chain linking the earthly realm to the divine. Traces of their activities persist in modern ledgers. Early Vatican bank records list anonymous foundations that conspicuously predate the institution itself. Their initial capital appears to materialize from an undisclosed origin, and their trustees remain unnamed. Yet, the distinct handwriting of the earliest entries, characterized by its fluid precision, remarkably matches that found in Orsini documents from centuries prior. The serpent's enduring circle persists, continuously reborn under new names, new crests, new banking entities, all consecrated by an impenetrable veil of secrecy. Perhaps this represents the most enduring legacy of these banker popes, the sophisticated transformation of faith into a financial commodity and of redemption into a form of credit. They effectively taught the world that salvation could be quantitatively measured, strategically borrowed, and ultimately repaid. That the church could govern empires not through military might or explicit decrees, but through invisible ledgers, wherein every soul, whether knowingly or not, remains eternally indebted. And somewhere beneath the ancient city of Rome, within a vault no pilgrim will ever behold, these coins still reside, their surfaces dimmed, their crowns smoothed by the touch of centuries. The serpent patiently coils around its circle, silent, complete. For the Orsini profoundly understood what few dared to acknowledge, that in a world predicated on belief, gold stands as the solitary prayer that never wanes. Beneath the intricate streetscape of Rome, in a realm where the scent of incense dissipates and sunlight cannot penetrate, a chapel is rumored to exist, one that the church has never officially named. It is conspicuously absent from all maps and archival records. Nevertheless, its supposed existence continues to permeate the hushed whispers of archivists and restorers alike. Those who claim to have encountered it refer to it as the Cappella Nera, the Black Chapel. Its frescoes depict no conventional saints, no celestial angels, nor any scenes of crucifixion. Instead, they portray beings of effulgent form, figures devoid of wings or halos, enveloped by intricate geometric patterns that seemingly resonate with impossible precision. It is said that within this chapel, light does not merely illuminate its walls, rather it emanates directly from them. For centuries, the Orsini family maintained numerous chapels across Rome, each formally consecrated by papal decree. However, one particular chapel, constructed beneath the ruins of a more ancient temple, was sealed immediately following its completion. No mass was ever celebrated, within its confines, nor does any record of its dedication survive. Yet in the oldest Orsini ledger, a cryptic annotation appears beside the entry for 1483.
Domus sub luce captum clausum, the house beneath the captured light sealed.
The handwriting in this entry corresponds precisely with that of Cardinal Latino Orsini, who passed away in the same year under circumstances that have never been adequately explained.
His tomb bears no epitaph, only a singular rose intricately carved within a circle of 12 stars. Legends pertaining to the Black Chapel originated among the very laborers who constructed it.
They spoke of frescoes that shimmered with an inherent luminescence, even before the paint had fully dried,
and of a sculptor who mysteriously vanished after carving the final archway. One particular account details how candles within the chapel inexplicably refused to remain lit, their flames extinguished by an unseen force.
When priests subsequently attempted to consecrate the space, their voices reportedly faltered, as if the very atmosphere resisted the invocation of sacred rites.
The church officially ordered the site to be sealed, its entrance barricaded with stone, and all related records destroyed. Nevertheless, centuries later, persistent whispers maintained that the chapel remained intact, concealed beneath successive layers of history, akin to a buried heart that continues to pulsate beneath the city's ancient foundations.
The iconography depicted in the frescoes challenges conventional religious belief.
In fragments, sketched by an anonymous hand, subsequently recovered from a private collection in Venice, the portrayed beings are tall and luminous, their faces serene yet featureless.
Encircling them are spiraling golden inscriptions, not in Latin, but in a script remarkably akin to the ancient Etruscan alphabet.
Scholars who have analyzed these sketches have identified symbols corresponding to those found on Orsini rings,
and within their manuscripts suggesting that the chapel's artistry was not heretical, but rather a form of coded theology.
The figures are interpreted
not as angels, but as intermediaries, manifestations of light unconstrained by either heaven or earth.
For the Orsini, such imagery may have symbolized the primordial architects of creation, beings who predated the fall of humanity, serving as guardians of knowledge deemed forbidden to mortals.
During restoration at first in 1936, an engineer working on tunnels near the Tiber River reported the discovery of a sealed stairway leading downwards.
The corridor was meticulously lined with marble, etched with the distinctive bear and rose motif, its steps descending into profound, chilling silence.
The engineer duly submitted his report. However, days later, the entrance was completely sealed, with concrete under the direct supervision of the Vatican. No official explanation was ever provided. His family subsequently asserted that he received a letter bearing a red wax seal, explicitly instructing him to obliterate any memory of the light he had encountered.
He reportedly never spoke of it again.
One might reasonably inquire why a family ostensibly devoted to the church would construct a chapel
that the ecclesiastical institution itself steadfastly refused to acknowledge. Some propose
it was an audacious experiment, a private sanctuary for the Orsini's esoteric faith,
a place where profound theological concepts intersected with astronomical principles, and where acts of worship were reinterpreted not as submission but as meticulous observation.
Others contend it functioned as a repository for knowledge too ancient and profound to be reconciled with doctrine.
It is seen as the physical embodiment of the Orsini Creed, that divinity could be governed and understood, rather than merely adored. The frescoes,
it is argued, were not merely art, but a form of encoded memory, diagrams illustrating the world as it existed prior to the imposition of the veil of faith. Fragments of correspondence between Orsini scholars and prominent Renaissance humanists reveal a profound preoccupation with light as a tangible substance. One letter, addressed to Marsilio Ficino, refers to the lumen primum, a force characterized as neither entirely spiritual nor wholly physical, but rather an intermediate essence, akin to the very breath of creation. To comprehend it, the writer warns, is to see without eyes and to remember before birth. Ficino's response, if it ever existed, has never been discovered. Nevertheless, the terminology lumen primum reappears in Orsini marginalia centuries later, frequently juxtaposed with diagrams that resemble celestial constellations, meticulously mapped onto cathedral floors. The implication is unsettling that the family endeavored to construct a chamber not for conventional worship, but for resonant interaction, a space precisely calibrated to capture this primordial light. Within the Vatican archives, sealed folios designated Resa 9b contain references to an anomalous reflection detected beneath the Orsini sector. These documents, briefly declassified in 1972 and swiftly reclassified days later, describe a chapel that emitted a faint luminescence originating from no identifiable source. Measurements yielded inconclusive results, and the investigative team assigned to the site was reassigned within the year. Officially, no such site is acknowledged to exist. Unofficially, however, fragments of their original notes were painstakingly copied by hand and circulated among archivists, detailing diagrams of geometric light patterns and energy recorded in the complete absence of any electrical source. The veracity of this data, whether genuine or fabricated, is secondary to its impact. The legend of the Black Chapel was effectively reinvigorated. The Orsini may have conceived the chapel as both a sacred temple and a sophisticated machine, an architectural invocation where every angle, every fresco, and every inscription functioned as a vital component of a grander design. In alchemical tradition, the color black signifies not mere absence, but profound transformation. The nigredo, or initial stage of enlightenment. Consequently, the name Capella Nera may not connote evil, but rather rebirth, a womb of light patiently awaiting emergence from darkness. The crowned serpent, so prominent on their coinage, here manifests as a spiral of illumination, consuming shadow to yield profound brilliance. To enter such a space, it is suggested, would be to penetrate the very core of their secret doctrine, that faith is not mere belief, but precise alignment, that divinity manifests as frequency rather than a fixed figure. A persistent legend among Roman Masons asserts that once every century, a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanates from beneath the ancient quarter where the Orsini palaces once stood. This sound, scarcely audible, reportedly persists for several hours before dissipating at dawn, while seismologists attribute it to subterranean vibrations. Local inhabitants refer to it as the breath of the chapel. Some even claim that during these specific nights, the walls of neighboring churches faintly shimmer, as if reflecting a concealed light from below. Although this phenomenon has never been scientifically verified, every account describes a consistent sensation, an overwhelming stillness, succeeded by a profound feeling of being observed, not by a physical presence, but by memory itself. The Church maintains an unbroken silence regarding this matter. Official guides make no mention of any subterranean sanctuary. Nevertheless, documents detailing renovations to a sealed vault near Ponte Sant'Angelo do exist. Authorized by the Vatican Office of Sacred Heritage in 1899, the supervising cardinal a distant descendant of the Orsini lineage, resigned shortly thereafter and retreated to a monastery where he refused all visitors until his death.
In his personal prayer book, a single line was repeatedly inscribed in fading ink. Lux clausa mane. The light remains enclosed. Perhaps the Black Chapel was never intended for discovery.
It may have been constructed as a profound message, rather than a mere physical location, a declaration interred beneath the immense weight of faith. Its frescoes, with their depictions of unbound beings of light, challenge every conventional notion of hierarchy and every perceived boundary between creator and creation.
To gaze upon them would be to recall that which the Orsini sought to preserve, that prior to the imposition of dogma and empire, there existed only boundless, formless, and free radiance. If such a chapel genuinely exists, its very silence constitutes the Church's most profound confession. For in concealing it,
the Vatican tacitly acknowledges that something beneath its foundations continues to communicate, not through scripture, but through the medium of light.
Thus, beneath Rome's
Pervasive incense and ancient stone, the legend persists of a hidden chamber where darkness gives birth to illumination, and where the architects of faith constructed, not for God, but for the fundamental truth he ostensibly forbade the world to perceive.
In every historical epoch,
the Church acknowledges the loss of certain documents, yet it is understood that none are ever truly obliterated.
Among dedicated archivists, a particular name persists whispered, like a clandestine prayer: Sigillum Obscurum, the forbidden seal. This is said to be a parchment sealed with black wax, inscribed with alternating lines of Latin and an intricate cipher bearing both the papal insignia and the distinctive Orsini crest. The Vatican has consistently denied its existence. Nevertheless, its spectral
presence seems to manifest across centuries of correspondence, like a ghost reflected in the ink of other documents. The earliest known mention surfaces in 1623 within the diary of a Dominican scribe who was cataloging confiscated heretical texts.
He describes a document of
peculiar authority, signed by a cardinal who simultaneously functioned as priest and inquisitor, confessor and executioner.
His handwriting noticeably falters when naming its custodian, an Orsini of an unspecified branch who, the scribe claimed, judged individuals not for God, but for memory itself. The scribe was found deceased the following week. His chambers were destroyed by fire, and his records meticulously erased, with the sole exception of that singular reference. To embody both the cross and the torch was to inherently defy the established natural order. Yet within the Orsini lineage,
such duality was a fundamental principle, not a transgression.
The Sigillum
Obscurum was rumored to codify this very creed, a manifesto of absolute authority,
asserting that salvation and damnation are fundamentally functions of power, rather than intrinsic virtue.
This document, some allege,
granted its possessor the prerogative to interpret heresy as a strategic necessity, to redefine sin in service of continuity. The family reportedly referred to it as the Second Covenant, a profound supplement to the faith they had meticulously constructed. The seal itself, as described in faded sketches, depicts the crowned serpent intricately entwined with an inverted cross. Not in blasphemy, but in perfect symmetry, symbolizing heaven mirrored in earth. Encircling this emblem is a phrase etched in archaic Latin: Deus regit per umbram suam. God rules through his own shadow.
While historians largely dismiss this phrase as a forgery, its precise language appears on a marble lintel
within an Orsini chapel in Bracciano. carved decades before the Inquisition formally commenced. During those tumultuous years, the Inquisition primarily served objectives of order, rather than purely spiritual faith. Rome was rife with unsettling whispers of corruption, and the papacy was desperate to retain control. In this climate of uncertainty, the Orsini offered a profound sense of stability. They provided inquisitors, legal experts, and financial resources, pledging to purify the church from within. Crucially, they also ensured that the process never became self-destructive. Those accused of heresy were frequently influential landholders, esteemed scholars, or prominent bankers, individuals whose removal strategically served papal ambitions. The trials effectively cleansed the ecclesiastical body while simultaneously augmenting its coffers. In every such case, an Orsini intermediary meticulously managed the transfer of confiscated property. Notably, the silvery confiscation coincidentally amplified their pervasive influence. Whispers of the Sigillum Obscurum eventually reached Spain and France, where Inquisition officers spoke of secret instructions arriving from Rome. Orders composed in an unknown cipher, sealed with black wax, and bearing the distinctive rose and bear emblem. These letters reportedly commanded that certain heretics be spared, while others were condemned irrespective of their confessions. The underlying rationale was never explicitly stated, but the recurring pattern revealed a clear design: the strategic survival of specific knowledge, artfully disguised as punitive measures. It was frequently asserted that individuals possessing wisdom deemed too perilous for outright destruction were publicly executed, yet privately preserved. Their extensive libraries would be confiscated, and their most promising students quietly integrated into Orsini estates under new inconspicuous identity. A particularly notable case emerged in 1630, involving a mathematician named Lorenzo d'Aquila, who faced trial for his calculations of divine mechanism. His intricate theories on planetary resonance strikingly echoed ancient Hermetic texts. Condemned to death, he mysteriously vanished en route to his execution. 2 years later, meticulously documented records of his work resurfaced in an Orsini inventory, explicitly labeled Proprietas Temporis, property of time. The signature appended beneath this entry precisely matched the cipher associated with the Sigillum Obscurum. Identical handwriting also appears in marginal annotations of a papal decree on celestial navigation, published decades subsequently, remaining anonymous yet demonstrably consistent. The Vatican has long and steadfastly denied the authenticity of such documents, yet persistent references continue to surface. In the late 19th century, an archivist named Paolo Ronali, unrelated to the later Pope John XXIII, recorded encountering a dark parchment meticulously wrapped in silk during a reorganization of the secret archives. He noted its unusual texture, describing it as neither paper nor animal skin, as if it had been inscribed upon the very absence of light itself. When he inquired about its catalog number, he was informed that it belonged to the Ordo Umbrae, Order of the Shadow, an internal classification signifying restriction to a clandestine order. 2 weeks later, Ronali abruptly departed Rome and entered a period of profound seclusion. His personal journals terminate mid-sentence with a chilling observation: the seal is not forbidden. It forbids. What profound power could such a document wield? Centuries after its initial creation, some conjecture that it constituted a license, a charter bestowing upon a single individual supreme authority over both faith and fear. Others posit that it contained a profound confession, a comprehensive record of all that had been systematically erased, meticulously preserved as an ultimate guarantee.
against any potential divine retaliation.
The Orsini, ever pragmatic, may have conceived of it as an ultimate safeguard, a binding contract linking the Church to their lineage, thereby ensuring that no subsequent doctrine could ever dismantle their foundational influence.
If this interpretation holds true, it represents the perfect weapon, a document too inherently dangerous to destroy, yet too strategically valuable to openly reveal. In esoteric traditions, seals transcended mere signatures. They functioned as potent vessels of authority, and their breach was believed to unleash their inherent power. The black wax of the sigillum obscurum was reputedly composed of ashes from sacred relics, fragments of saintly bones consecrated, ink, and remnants of parchment incinerated from forbidden gospels. Its opening was said to necessitate a ritual of reversal, invoking not damnation, but profound remembrance. The bearer, according to legend, possessed the unparalleled ability to absolve or condemn with a singular decree, entirely unchallenged by any reigning pontiff. If verifiably true, this would imply that for centuries the supreme authority of the Church resided
not in a divine celestial realm, but in the physical hand of a single individual, bound by both blood and profound silence. Fragments of correspondence from the 18th century suggest that this document may have resurfaced
during the Enlightenment, a period when the ascendance of reason posed a significant threat to established religious revelation.
Philosophers alluded to a black papal seal that purportedly granted immunity to those who served a higher purpose. Voltaire, in one cryptic letter, references a parchment originating from the House of Bears, which purportedly bestowed divine pardon to those who write what cannot be spoken.
Whether jest or truth, his choice of words indicates the prevalence of this rumor, even beyond the confines of Rome.
In 1947, amidst the comprehensive reorganization of the Vatican's secret archive under Pope Pius XII, a box labeled S01 was relocated to a new vault.
Its inventory vaguely describes an unmarked parchment bearing unknown sigil wrapped in dark silk, origin indeterminate.
The file remains strictly sealed.
Repeated requests for access have been consistently denied, citing the imperative protection of historical sanctity. Archivists now discreetly refer to it only as the orphaned file, a phrase strikingly similar to Orsini Filius, son of Orsini. As if the archive itself retains a memory of its true creator.
Whether myth or verified memory, the sigillum obscurum embodies the fundamental paradox at the heart of the Orsini legacy. The profound conviction that control and redemption are inextricably linked. To judge is, in their philosophy, to preserve.
To destroy is paradoxically to protect.
The patriarch who held that seal effectively became both priest and inquisitor, judge and redeemer of his own clandestine creed. And perhaps the Church, in its decision to inter the document, inadvertently preserved not a heresy, but itself.
For to acknowledge such immense power would be to concede that salvation has perpetually been a negotiable
commodity, and that even divine justice carries the tangible weight of a signature inscribed in shadow, buried beneath layers of time and unquestioning obedience. The forbidden seal awaits, not lost, but merely quiescent. Its wax remains unbroken, its intricate words unread, its profound silence more resonant than overt faith. For certain truths do not simply vanish, they are deliberately sealed away, patiently awaiting the day when the world summons the courage to recall what it once collectively chose to forget. Every papal conclave is historically characterized by its distinctive smoke,
white signifying a divinely inspired decision, black indicating that the heavens remain silent. However, those who operated within the Vatican's clandestine corridor speak of an entirely different hue,
one that never ascended above the rooftops. The color of debt. For behind the solemn hymns and securely locked doors, a second council convened. Unseen, unrecorded, and bound not by sacred scripture, but by immutable obligation. The Orsini referred to it as the Concilium Internum, the council within the council. To the external world, it possessed no verifiable existence. Yet to the pontiffs it effectively crowned, it represented the very cost of their eternal office.
The established rules of papal election were ostensibly designed to ensure spiritual purity, with cardinals
entering as equals, guided solely by their conscience. Nevertheless, historical analysis reveals intricate patterns that no amount of prayer can adequately explain.
Every decisive conclave from the 12th century through to the modern era bears the subtle imprints of the same invisible choreography: delegates strategically silenced, votes inexplicably withdrawn, and alliances meticulously formed and dissolved overnight.
When the smoke ultimately ascended, signaling a new pontiff, those who were indebted to the Orsini discreetly smiled and receded back into the shadows. This was not a system of crude bribery. It was a sophisticated equilibrium. Every pivotal choice had been meticulously predetermined long before the conclave doors were sealed. In 13th century chronicles, an Avignon cardinal describes how a particular Roman house provided the papal candidates with comfort, counsel, and sustenance throughout the deliberations. This house, unnamed in the text, was demonstrably located on Orsini land. The provisions were simple, yet each loaf of bread bore a distinctive rose mark, branded by an iron.
A symbol that could be interpreted as either hospitality or a subtle reminder of debt.
The conclave concluded with unusual swiftness.
The newly elected Pope's inaugural decree formally confirmed 3 Orsini properties as papal sanctuaries, thereby rendering them immune to taxation. This stands as the first documented instance of a divine choice, unequivocally repaying an earthly promise.
As the centuries progressed,
this intricate process evolved into a meticulously observed ritual.
The family never directly intervened.
Their influence was so deeply encoded within the very design of the church
that such overt actions were unnecessary.
Their cardinals were rigorously trained by Orsini scholars, whose own studies were funded by Orsini banks.
The College of Cardinals effectively became a carefully cultivated field, nurtured by the family for generations. Within this meticulously managed domain, every harvest of influence followed a predictable rhythm. Favors were meticulously repaid, silence was generously rewarded, and inconvenient memories were systematically erased. In 1455, following the sudden demise of Pope Nicholas V, a conclave convened amidst palpable tension and pervasive intrigue.
The Vatican treasury was depleted, its debts immense. A messenger arrived bearing a sealed chest containing documents that explicitly forgave half of the church's outstanding debts.
The donor remained anonymous. 2 days later, a new pontiff was elected. His inaugural decree promptly reinstated an Orsini relative as papal chamberlain. History labels this a mere coincidence. The archives, more revealingly, describe it as providence. It was during these centuries that the phrase, "the smoke of the Orsini," entered Vatican vernacular. It referred not to the visible smoke from the Sistine Chapel chimney, but to the unseen signal of a decision already predetermined.
When the rose burns,
wrote one cardinal in a private letter. The white smoke follows. Their power did not rely on overt threats or violence.
Instead, it rested upon the ancient enduring law of human exchange, gratitude. Each cardinal carried his own ledger of debt, his own secret reliance on Orsini patronage, a niece's dowry provided, a son's position secured in a monastery, a library meticulously restored, a damaging rumor discreetly silenced. In Rome, such gifts were never truly gratuitous. They functioned as unspoken contracts, binding as a solemn confession.
When the bells summoned the cardinals to cast their votes, they carried not only their prayers, but also the indelible memories of those quiet favors. During the Renaissance, the Orsini's influence became even more subtle. The conclave process, now more complex, presented novel opportunities for meticulous orchestration. Letters were discreetly conveyed
through couriers disguised as humble servants.
Messages written in invisible ink
Were embedded between the lines of devotional texts.
A psalm
Delivered to one candidate might contain hidden numbers referencing his key supporters.
Another might include veiled threats, meticulously written in ciphered Latin, serving as a stark reminder of past generosity and the enduring obligation it incurred. The chosen pontiff invariably emerged in perfect alignment with Orsini interests. An anecdote from the 1520 conclave recounts a cardinal who, moments before casting his vote, received a small silver mirror, intricately engraved with a bear. The messenger who delivered it vanished into the crowd. The cardinal's diary, subsequently discovered among his personal effects, his eyes, records that he felt seen, unseen eyes, and consequently altered his vote. That particular election
Ultimately produced a pope renowned for his reforms of the Vatican's finances.
reforms that with remarkable discretion returned key assets to Orsini control.
The council within the council's purview extended significantly beyond mere elections, actively guiding the very formulation of ecclesiastical doctrine.
When pivotal new dogmas such as the Immaculate Conception and papal infallibility were drafted, their precise wording bore subtle theological fingerprints demonstrably traceable to Orsini's scholars.
They meticulously inserted language that explicitly equated divine authority with immutable
Institutional permanence, thereby ensuring that the Church could never, through self-reform, legislate itself out of existence. These insertions were remarkably minute, almost imperceptible, or a single phrase, a subtly rearranged verse.
Yet their consequences were absolute.
The family had long recognized
That control over definition inherently translated into control over reality itself.
records from 1878, when Pope Leo XIII was elected, document the attendance of certain private observers at the conclave, despite no such role officially existing. The names of these observers are conspicuously absent, but a ledger in the Orsini archives meticulously lists generous donations to unnamed custodians of the Holy Transition.
The timing of these donations precisely aligns with the conclave's final day. From that election forward, papal appointments increasingly favored individuals from banking circles, diplomats, and families with ancient Roman lineage.
Once more, the circle of influence seamlessly closed upon itself.
Even in the contemporary era, rumors persist.
Journalists investigating Vatican finance frequently allude to the Rose signature, a recurring pattern of
Anonymous benefactors providing financial underwriting for papal initiatives at critical junctures.
and the earliest directors of
The Vatican Bank trace their lineage to families long associated with the Orsini. Officially, these connections are dismissed as coincidental. Unofficially, they form the same unbroken chain of influence. Each election still culminates in the ascent of white smoke. Yet the true decisions are often forged in windowless rooms, guided by debts invisible yet immortal. Some historians propose that such pervasive influence is an inherent inevitability, that every enduring institution harbors a secondary, unseen yet decisive structure. The Orsini merely formalized practices that others pursued instinctively. Their concilium internum was not an act of rebellion, but a meticulous refinement, a shadow parliament of conscience, ensuring that every papal utterance ultimately served the imperative of continuity. It was, in essence, a council dedicated to preserving the illusion of divine unpredictability, while simultaneously guaranteeing human control. Occasionally, dissent would surface. A few cardinals attempted to expose this intricate pattern, accusing their peers of conspiracy. Yet none could provide concrete proof, for Orsini influence left no discernible trace. It existed within the subtle nuances of custom, in the unspoken pauses between prayers. By the time the accusers concluded their statements, their careers had quietly ended, and their names were conspicuously omitted from future conclaves. Rome had no tolerance for those who questioned the mechanisms behind its perceived miracles. It is recounted that during the 20th century conclave that elected Pope Pius XII, an elderly cardinal remarked, "We do not choose, we remember." His words, recorded by a witness, subsequently vanished from the official transcript. The Orsini had meticulously trained Rome. Selection had transformed into memory, and memory into unwavering obedience. To this very day, white smoke continues to ascend, crowds still cheer, and bells still proclaim that God has chosen. However, if one could descend into the Vatican's deeper archives, past the sealed chambers and forgotten keys, perhaps another record awaits. One that lists not the elected pontiffs, but the arrangers. Names inscribed in invisible ink. Debts meticulously noted in symbols older than Latin. For while the Church celebrates divine will, the Orsini taught it the more subtle art of divine timing. And in every conclave, when the final vote is cast, the invisible council silently reconvenes, ensuring that the rose continues to bloom behind the veil of smoke. When empires succumb to collapse, reform frequently emerges as the Church's preferred guise. To ostensibly renew faith is in essence to preserve authority under a different nomenclature. Yet every act of reform conceals a deeper bargain, and every bargain casts a lingering shadow. The Orsini understood this profound truth more acutely than any pontiff they ever served. When the Vatican appeared to undergo fundamental change, it was merely adjusting the mask it presented to temporal monarchs. Behind each public decree of renewal, a more discreet document circulated, unsigned, sealed with red wool and witnessed by individuals who govern not from imperial thrones but from powerful counting houses. These were the concordati umbrae, the shadow concordats. Through these clandestine agreements, the Orsini ensured that the sacred papal throne would never stand in isolation. In the 16th century, as the Reformation irrevocably fractured Christendom, Rome's very foundations trembled. Monarchs withdrew their allegiance, priests openly married, and the Church's treasury significantly dwindled. To ensure its survival, it urgently required allies, not solely of faith, but of immense fortune. Into this void stepped the Orsini diplomats, fluent in both spiritual and temporal languages. They meticulously brokered agreements between the Vatican and various crowns, offering spiritual absolution in exchange for political allegiance, and gold in exchange for profound silence. The official treaties, the overt concordats, publicly proclaim spiritual unity. The hidden agreements, however, guaranteed unwavering control under Orsini terms. Kings retained their dominion only so long as their financial debts remained serviceable, and every banker who provided financing owed unswerving loyalty to an Orsini intermediary. This intricate balance was perfect. Power diffused by secrecy, sanctified by an overriding necessity. The first of these pivotal pacts is believed to have been ratified in 1559, the year Pope Paul IV died, and Europe prepared for a dramatic new order. While the conclave rigorously debated theological points, Orsini, envoys secretly met with representatives of the Habsburgs and the Medici. The outcome was a profound agreement, conspicuously absent from papal archives. The Church would bestow its blessing upon imperial succession in exchange for guaranteed access to bullion from Spanish mines. For the Orsini, who meticulously managed these crucial financial transfers, it was a masterpiece of strategic design. A covenant inscribed not in ink, but in the intricate movement of gold. In Paris, similar arrangements unfolded when the French crown sought reconciliation with Rome. After decades of religious warfare, it was an Orsini cousin who meticulously drafted the terms. The king gained essential legitimacy. The Vatican regained its teeth, and the Orsini secured exclusive rights to mediate church loans within France. The document's margin bore a subtle engraving, a rose pierced by a crown. Few observed it, even fewer comprehended its profound implications. Every subsequent century mirrored this pattern. The Enlightenment heralded widespread rebellion. The Napoleonic era brought dissolution, and the Papal States ultimately collapsed, compelling the Church to publicly proclaim humility. Yet even in exile, it never relinquished its vital revenue. The reason was straightforward. The shadow concordats had already anticipated and mitigated such losses. Decades earlier, Orsini agents had strategically secured investments through private banks in Vienna and London, systematically transferring wealth from tangible land holdings to secure ledgers. When armies seized territory, these offshore accounts remained untouched. The Vatican, in its outward appearance, seemed impoverished, while its unseen architect grew both invisible and immensely wealthy. During the Congress of Vienna in 1815, as Europe's political map was redrawn, the papal envoy was discreetly guided by a Jesuit confessor whose lineage traced to Orsini blood. Behind closed doors, he negotiated more than restoration. He redefined survival. In exchange for neutrality in volatile continental politics, the Church received formal recognition of its spiritual sovereignty, a phrase judiciously inserted at Orsini's suggestion. The term seemed harmless, yet it allowed the Vatican to operate as a self-governing nation-state within a broader international framework answerable only to itself. Hidden beneath the same clause was a vital annex concerning financial indemnities, payments routed through banking houses tied to the Orsini estates. Reform for the world meant security for the bloodline. By the 19th century, the Orsini no longer needed to appear at the negotiating table. Their descendants worked through proxies, cardinals, financiers, and diplomats who carried different names but shared a single allegiance. The extensive papal reforms initiated by Pius IX, which famously declared the Pope infallible, were funded by consortia, whose ultimate ownership could be traced back to unidentified Roman interests. Even the Vatican's modernized banking system, formally established under the Lateran Treaty of 1929, meticulously followed precedents set centuries earlier by Orsini treaties. Behind the prominent signatures of Mussolini and Cardinal Gaspari lies an earlier draft, composed in almost identical language dated 1712 and sealed with a solitary rose. The core philosophy of the Orsini was remarkably straightforward. Never permit the sacred to exist in isolation. They firmly believed that the Church must invariably be paired with its worldly reflection, whether government, finance, or family, thereby ensuring that faith and control could operate as a unified entity.
This inherent duality preserved their concept of sacred balance, the very equilibrium sanctum that had governed their strategic wars and influential councils. Where popes offered prayers, kings demonstrated obedience. Where kings rebelled, bankers discreetly intervened. This intricate network functioned akin to a vast nervous system, seamlessly connecting cathedrals to palaces and altars to banks. To the faithful, it was perceived as divine providence. To the initiated, it was recognized as masterful orchestration. When this intricate system of reform reached the Americas, the underlying pattern migrated alongside it. Missionaries carried Bibles, merchants carried substantial loans, and the same unseen seals appeared on colonial charters. Under the veneer of evangelization, Orsini agents shrewdly acquired mineral rights and lucrative shipping contracts. The expansion of the Church thus became virtually indistinguishable from commercial enterprise. A report submitted to the Holy Office in 1754 lamented that certain Roman financiers dictate the rhythm of conversion. This complaint was subsequently dismissed, and the bishop who filed it reportedly died in his sleep. Even widespread revolutions ultimately served the same underlying blueprint. When monarchs fell, their associated bankers often survived. When churches were consumed by fire, their treasuries inexplicably reappeared under new institutional guises. In each upheaval, families connected to the Orsini consistently resurfaced, sometimes as Republicans, sometimes as conservatives, but invariably as creditors. They profoundly understood that political ideology was ephemeral, whereas financial obligation was eternal. The shadow concordats outlasted the very regimes they had discreetly financed, their clauses rewritten into modern language, yet never truly revoked. By the 20th century, the Vatican had cultivated an image as a moral voice transcending political concerns. Nevertheless, its continued survival remained dependent upon these same invisible alliances. During the Second World War, while official neutrality was declared, trade routes remained open through banks registered in neutral states. Some of these accounts bore initials long associated with the Orsini. A ledger declassified in the 1980s lists benefactors funding Vatican humanitarian missions. Among them appears a symbol rather than a specific name, a crowned serpent encircling a cross. No historian has been able to definitively trace its owner. Today, these underlying agreements persist in more subtle forms. Memoranda between the Holy See and multinational institutions, contracts for significant art loans, humanitarian funds, and vital preservation grants. Each of these echoes the precise structural framework first perfected by the Orsini centuries earlier. Shared risk, shared secrecy, and shared immunity. The Church retains its untouchable status, not because it exists in isolation from the world, but precisely because it is inextricably bound to it by countless invisible threads. Reform, as meticulously engineered by the Orsini, implied a strategic evolution, never changing sufficiently to relinquish underlying control. Perhaps this constitutes the ultimate brilliance of the shadow concordats, their inherent capacity to endure public exposure. Even if explicitly identified, their intricate mechanisms cannot be dismantled. For the modern world itself now operates according to their fundamental design. Every nation incurs debt, implicitly borrowing in faith. Every institution sanctifies its financial obligations, the sacred and the secular, the sovereign throne and the secure vault. have merged into a singular, cohesive architecture, and somewhere beneath the magnificent frescoes and polished marble, the original agreements reside in parchments sealed with red wax. While the signatures may have faded with time, the profound bonds they established remain unbroken. Pontiffs may have genuinely believed they were negotiating for salvation, and monarchs may have been convinced they were securing legitimacy. Only the Orsini comprehended the deeper truth. What they meticulously forged was not merely an alliance, but an enduring dependency.
Reform was simply the ritual through which this dependency was perpetually renewed.
The church, they ensured, would stand eternally, yet never in isolation.
And within that profound, quiet symmetry of piety and pervasive power, the architects of the Shadow Concordats found the immortality they had relentlessly pursued. Dynasties seldom truly perish. Rather, they subtly dissolve into silence, leaving behind traces too intricately woven to be easily expunged. The prominent Orsini name gradually receded from formal titles and public tombs.
Nevertheless, their distinctive emblems, the crowned serpent, the rose delicately encircled, began to surface in unforeseen contexts. These appeared not on heraldic banners or grand palaces, but meticulously etched into the very architecture of modern finance and philanthropy.
What the Church once characterized as divine providence now adopts the lexicon of economics. Thus, the heirs of this influential empire nourish in plain sight, concealed not by overt secrecy, but by an impenetrable veil of respectability.
By the late 19th century, with the fall of the Papal States and the apparent fragmentation of the aristocracy, the extensive Orsini estates, once stretching from Bracciano to Monte Giordano, were dismembered by inheritance laws and contemporary reforms. Palaces were repurposed as museums, villas were sold to foreign investors, the lineage seemingly withered, its remnants relegated to mere footnotes in history. However, for the Orsini, such disappearance was invariably a calculated strategy, never an act of surrender. Their archives speak of a methodical transference, a deliberate process of liquidating assets, renaming trusts, and strategically positioning heirs beyond easy identification. One particular ledger concludes with a singular telling phrase, "Familia dissimulata manit." The concealed family endures. What succeeded their vast estates was not emptiness, but rather a sophisticated evolution. Numerous foundations emerged across Europe, meticulously registered under neutral names, associations dedicated to education, culture, and preservation. Their insignias incorporated familiar geometric motifs, a rose divided by 12 lines, or a serpent encircling a globe. Their charters listed esteemed noble patrons, publicly positioned as mere benefactors of Rome. Yet financial records consistently trace their initial seed capital to accounts previously linked to the Vatican's historical banking networks. Precisely the same channels the Orsini had long controlled. Even in their ostensible disappearance, they navigated through a continuous evolution, subtly shaping the burgeoning modern age through artfully constructed charitable masks. One notable foundation, established in Geneva in 1924, conspicuously sponsored archaeological excavations in the Near East. Its distinctive emblem, a sunburst encompassing a coiled serpent, precisely corresponded to a symbol discovered in a 15th century Orsini codex, which discussed the preservation of light through deliberate concealment. The directors of this foundation rotated every decade, yet they shared remarkably similar educational backgrounds, a subtle connection in lineage and a pervasive discretion. Their public mission statement declared a profound commitment to recovering the memory
of humanity's first architects.
Few recognize that this specific phrase subtly echoed an inscription once carved into the gates of the Orsini palace. Ad memoria mundi edificata est. Built for the memory of the world.
Across the Atlantic, another influential institution emerged, a New York-based trust dedicated to the restoration of religious art. Its initial endowment arrived via a banker whose ancestry, though ostensibly modest on paper, could be traced back to Rome's ancient nobility.
The trust's official seal
featured an 8-petal rose surrounded by serpentine filigree, subtle, elegantly crafted, and unmistakably Orsini in its aesthetic.
Within 2 decades, its influence permeated major museum boards, church commissions, and prestigious private collections. Significant works, once securely hidden within Vatican vaults, reappeared in public exhibitions, meticulously curated under its sponsorship. The accompanying catalogs invariably credited anonymous donors. Nevertheless, each bore the same enigmatic signature, a stylized O, intricately fused with a serpent's tail.
While some dismissed these symbols as mere coincidence, the pervasive patterns of recurrence betray a deliberate design. The Orsini's fundamental creed was never solely about direct rule. It was about unwavering persistence. Their doctrine of equilibrium sanctum, or sacred balance, necessitated constant adaptation.
When monarchies collapsed, they adeptly transformed into powerful financiers.
When empires disintegrated, they transitioned into influential patrons. In an increasingly secular world, they mastered the art of governing collective conscience through culture.
Museums, universities, and humanitarian organizations effectively became their new cathedrals.
Temples of pervasive influence, where overt faith was supplanted by calculated philanthropy, and explicit obedience was subtly replaced by profound gratitude.
During the mid-20th century, as Europe embarked on its monumental reconstruction efforts following devastating wars, various charitable organizations emerged to administer crucial relief across ravaged regions. Their headquarters were strategically neutral, and their funding sources remarkably abundant.
Behind these public-facing entities, anonymous boards meticulously managed logistics with almost military precision.
Among their recurring symbols was a distinctive motif, a bear cradling a globe.
Investigators found no official record of its origin.
When discreetly questioned,
a Vatican official described these groups as cooperators in divine recovery.
Perhaps he possessed an
intimate understanding of a profound truth: that ancient families do not merely vanish, but further they adapt, skillfully converting their historical legacy into robust infrastructure, and their collective memory into sophisticated management systems.
The advent of the digital age did not disrupt this enduring thread. It merely refined its intricate operations. In the financial filings of
modern philanthropic trusts, ownership frequently flows through multiple layers of shell companies, registered in jurisdictions such as Luxembourg, Malta, and the Cayman Islands. Regions that subtly echo the medieval trade routes once predominantly controlled by papal financiers.
Even the Vatican Bank, now meticulously rebranded and regulated, maintains intricate investment partnerships
with entities whose founding dates conspicuously coincide with the official dissolution of Orsini estates.
A leaked internal report from the early 2000s references a heritage consortium holding billions in assets, explicitly dedicated to the preservation of ancient ecclesiastical institutions. The consortium's logo, a rose intricately placed inside a 12-pointed star, presents a compelling question: coincidence or continuity?
However, when such coincidences accrue over centuries, they transcend mere chance.
They evolve into a deliberate design,
Artfully cloaked in the guise of inevitability.
the heirs of the Orsini.
If they indeed exist, necessitate no formal titles or grand palaces.
Their pervasive power permeates the very architecture of global systems. The discrete governance
Exerted by foundation boards, advisory councils, and powerful investment committees.
they mastered a truth rarely grasped, that the modern world reveres transparency with the same blind devotion that the ancient world accorded to faith.
Consequently, they seamlessly dissolved into this transparency, much as light disappears into glass, unseen, yet omnipresent. An investigative journalist once asserted that he had meticulously traced an unbroken chain of financial transactions, linking an Orsini estate sale in 1891 to a global humanitarian fund that remains actively operational today.
His comprehensive report detailed a discernible pattern of recurring names, subtly varied from the original: Orsini, Bursini, Ursin, Orsinelli, scattered across numerous corporate entities. Prior to its publication, the editor controversially retracted the story, citing issues with unverifiable sources.
The journalist subsequently disappeared while traveling through Italy, and his extensive notes were never recovered.
Weeks later,
His family received an anonymous donation to a scholarship fund he had supported.
accompanied by a single embossed card bearing a silver foil rose. In the more discreet echelons of academia,
Certain scholars speculate that the Orsini no longer pursue overt dominance,
but rather prioritize meticulous preservation.
Their influence, once directed towards empire building, now functions to ensure the enduring continuity of divine order, even as traditional religious adherence wanes.
In this profound sense,
Their legacy has achieved a success beyond conventional imagination. For what greater power can exist than to so thoroughly shape the foundational structure of civilization that one's own presence becomes utterly indistinguishable from it? Should one stand today before the gleaming facade of a modern bank in Rome, its glass towers reflecting the vast sky, observe closely the ornamental design positioned above its entrance.
the intricate pattern might initially appear
Abstract, a circle intertwined with a spiral. However, under specific illumination, the design subtly reveals a rose blossoming within a serpent's coil. Beneath the grand lobby, the impenetrable vaults resonate with a quiet, unwavering precision.
safeguarded not by traditional swords, but by complex digital codes. And somewhere within those profound depths,
Digital ledgers meticulously preserve the information
once held by ancient parchments, a comprehensive record of debts, strategic alliances, and faith itself, now meticulously converted into numerical data.
The Orsini heirs may have ostensibly vanished in name, yet their underlying design remains impeccably flawless.
Power, they profoundly understood, is not merely possession. It is an enduring persistence.
And persistence, they realized, necessitates invisibility. To effectively disappear is to ensure survival. To survive is to govern from an unseen position.
Their vast estates may have been dissolved, but their emblems, now intricately etched in marble, formally printed on letterheads and securely encrypted in data, continue to articulate the same silent creed: dominion achieved through continuity, faith maintained through concealment, and eternity secured through adaptive evolution.
Perhaps this constitutes the ultimate truth concerning every vanished crown. It does not simply fall, it transforms. It becomes embedded in architecture, codified in law, manifested in philanthropy, the unseen inheritance that subtly guides the visible world.
The bear continues to guard the rose. The serpent still proudly wears its crown. And the family that mastered the art of consecrating control has ultimately become precisely what it always aspired to be. Not overt rulers of men, but rather the custodians of collective memory, intricately hidden within the very systems that shape the world's perception of its own freedom. Every empire, every creed, and every clandestine order originates from a singular fundamental question. What is the intrinsic value of truth if it cannot be meticulously controlled?
For the or